All right, you want to go or?
All right, everybody, welcome to the EMU session at IETF 121. Please be advised that this session is being recorded. You'll even get to watch yourself on YouTube. All right, this is the note well. I hope by this point in the week you have already seen it multiple times, but it's basically, please be aware of our standards process listed in BCP 9, our working group procedures, anti-harassment procedures, our code of conduct, be nice to each other, thank you, our copyright document, and patents and participation. And we also have a privacy policy in case you're interested in that. All right, so, and then the note really well. All right, so hopefully you've seen this as well, but basically be really nice to each other. Harassing others is not something that we really like. All right, meeting tips. If you are on site, then you can sign into the Meet Echo Lite client from the data tracker. If you're remote, then maybe you want to use the heavy duty version. Please use Meet Echo to join the queue, to speak at the mic, even if you are here. All right, so we have an agenda here. I'm hoping that the administrivia does not take the full 10 minutes. We have 4 working group documents that we'll divide up most of the time. And then we have EAP PPT bringing up the rear. We need note takers. Joe, I know you called. Did we get? Okay, thank you. And if somebody could just watch the chat and let us know if there's something we're missing, that would be helpful. Other than that, does anyone have any changes needed for the agenda? I think I have slides for everything, so, okay. Alan, you are up for a brief EAP.ARPA. Very brief.
All right, very, very, very brief. Actually, I'll take 2 seconds first, if it's okay to say 7170 biz is still ongoing. It's waiting for an ACME draft, which is also in IESG review, I think. So all that work was very good, and it is ongoing. Anyways, EAP.ARPA. That's it. We've had some updates and clarifications. Hecky gave a review, added more text on security and consistency. The previous draft was largely saying this is what to do as a good idea. You need to have updates about when things go wrong, what else to do. I believe there aren't any comments on it. It seemed to be okay, and at least the DPP authors have seemed to have read it and update their document based on that. So hearing that, I don't know if there's anything else. Questions, comments? How many people have read it? Read the latest draft? Wow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, very good. Okay. No comments? Yay, it's perfect. Thank you.
All righty.
Go ahead. Okay, Owen, I think you're up.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So summary, if you people who aren't familiar with the draft, it's using the DPP, Wi-Fi lines, bootstrap provisioning QR code, making sure we can use that inside a TLS transaction in an EAP transaction. We're not inventing anything funky. All the work is based on 4 existing TLS RFCs and Alan's updated EAP-ARPA. We're not inventing any UTLS extensions, doing any funky crypto. We're 100% reliant on 4 existing TLS RFCs. Next slide. We're at last call. All the comments to date have been addressed. This is already out of date because we got 2 emails over since I published this presentation on Friday. We got 2 new emails. So there's some minor comments we need to fix up that aren't addressed in draft 7. And one thing we do need to do is add test vectors. Me and Dan have worked on that. We have test vectors ready to go. We just need to update the doc to add test vectors. Next slide. This is where it gets a bit hairy. Implementation status, as I said, we're based on 4 existing TLS RFCs. 2 of them were quite recent and aren't very widely implemented. So on Ivan implementation, based on Richard Barnes' Golang Mint stack of the entire stack. Unfortunately, OpenSSL doesn't have support for importing PSKs into TLS. OpenSSL also doesn't have support for RFC 8773. I've implemented that on my branch. It's not merged into OpenSSL yet, because merging stuff into OpenSSL takes a long time. GNU TLS doesn't have implementation at all for RFC 8773. And, well, I don't know, Alan, do we have an implementation yet on free radius that supports your draft? No. So we don't have an end-to-end implementation. On a Mint stack, we've all the TLS bits done, but it's not integrated into an AAA because we don't have a AAA that supports it. And we don't have a commercial TLS stack that we can build our stuff on top of, because no commercial TLS stack actually supports all the 4 dependent RFCs we have. That's the update.
Okay. I don't know if I got it to the list, but I think you're missing an IANA considerations section.
That's
Okay.
one of the emails
Okay,
that came
great.
in
I
the last
wasn't
2
sure if
days
it
that I
was-
haven't. Yeah.
So this is Alan. In terms of implementations of EAP.ARPA, there isn't a lot necessarily, generally. It's more administration. If you
Yeah.
see this, then give people a captive portal, which is part of the normal radius/EAP thing. The harder part, I think, is things like anonymous EAP TLS, which is provided for in the previous RFCs, but there's absolutely no description as to how to do it, so nobody does it and nobody knows how. Would have to finish that. So in theory, it's all really straightforward to do. It just takes time.
Yeah, and in theory, all the TLS stuff is easy to do as well, and it all works on Mint. But just finding a commercial stack that has all the different dependent RFCs is really hard. Okay.
Thank you.
EAP ad hoc. Is Dan here? EAP ad hoc or online? Okay, perfect. We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Yeah. First, sorry about the voice. I am a little bit hoarse. Okay, so I will do my best to explain everything. So, can you please go to the next slide?
It sounds like you're not going through the correct mic. I don't know if I don't think it's just your voice. Nope, that's none at all. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
You're still pretty quiet, but
Give me 1 second, please.
Can folks in the room understand him? No. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I think we should proceed. Oh, that's a little bit better, maybe.
Okay, better.
It sounds like the mic on your maybe going through your laptop instead of your headphones.
Okay, I am with a desktop computer, so it's supposed to be going through the headphones. I checked. So,
The other co-authors online.
can you hear me now?
Yeah,
It's
let's
better.
go. I think we can manage.
Okay. So, can you please go to the next slide, please? So, next one, I am going to try to make it as quick as possible due to the technical issues. So first, I would like just to uh, thank Marco for his review. In fact, we just incorporated his comments into the last version of the draft. During his exchange and his comments, a issue arise. Can you please go to the next slide? So we uploaded a next version, but there's still one issue to be addressed. Okay, the issue is the following. Can you please go to the next slide? So the thing here is that we are understanding that even though ad hoc carries a connection identifier within the EAP conversation, okay, during the EAP exchange, there is a question on what happens, or is it even possible to have ongoing EAP conversations between the same peer and the same server. If it is that the case, maybe we need to add some connection identifiers outside of the standard ad hoc message. Can you please go to the next slide? So here is basically the question. And this is a question for the EMU working group. We want the working group to please pitch in and help us answer this question. So can we assume by specifying an EAP method that the EAP layer and the lower layer is going to keep all the exchanges distinguishable between each sessions? Even in the case we are running parallel exchanges, is this going to be reliable, or is it even this case conceivable? Is this a possible use case? So if we can assume that EAP and the lower layer are going to take care of relating all the exchanges, then we do not need to do anything else, anything additional. But if there is some case where the EAP layer and the lower layer is not going to be able to relate all these messages, even in the case of parallel sessions, if this case is to be supported, then we need to add the connection identifiers externally, as is done in other cases. We think that the answer is yes. So we think that we can relate, that we can trust the EAP layer and lower layers to take care of this. So we understand that this is not necessary, but this is a question that we want to ask the working group. Hopefully my question made it to the group.
Yeah. So this is Alan. I won't talk about any IEEE layers. I've avoided that. On the radius side, at least, the connections between the association between each individual EAP packet and the next one is controlled by the server, which has a state attribute, and that is essentially globally unique to the radius server. And so when the next connection comes in, it doesn't look at any of the EAP contents to try to distinguish the session. It looks at this state attribute, which is, call it a 128-bit nonce. And then it determines, ooh, I have a session already for that state. And then it associates the new packet with the previous one. So the answer is that the radius server is essentially required to distinguish different EAP sessions. I don't think this should be a problem.
And that should be the same with lower layers as well, with the 802 lower layers. The correlation is done in the encapsulating protocol. Now, there is I couldn't tell if you had a question about fragmentation. Fragmentation is not handled by the lower layer. I think EAP has to handle the fragmentation. If you look at EAP TLS, for example, has a fragmentation scheme.
Yes, that is why we ask about deep layer and lower layer. So as a group, can we relate in the whole framework in this sense? I think our co-author is raising a voice. Maybe he has better luck explaining things.
Okay, Rafael?
Yes, okay. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay. Okay. No. Yes. The question about fragmentation was that actually just to highlight the fact that we haven't seen any, let's say, additional information to manage the fragmentation, assuming each fragment in the EAP method that supports that has a correlation as a consequence of the, the EAP layer or the EAP lower layers. There is no fragment ID or anything in EAP TLS, for example, 1.3. And we don't have anything in EAP TLS, something external to the TLS ciphertext record. So the assumption, the underlying assumption is that we think the answer is yes. So everything, as you mentioned, it's handled by the EAP lower layer, and it's able to, or the EAP lower layer or lower layers are able to distinguish between different EAP authentications. So that correlation will happen. So we don't need to add anything else. Actually, EAP ad hoc has fragmentation support, and we have a similar support to EAP TLS 1.3. So.
Yeah, this is Alan again. Yeah, you don't need to do anything to distinguish the different EAP sessions. The lower layer or radius or whatever takes care of that.
Right.
But
Okay.
you do have to handle fragmentation. That is 100% specific to each EAP method. You have to define your own method of fragmentation.
Yeah, sure. We did that actually in EAP ad hoc in the same way that is supporting in EAP TLS 1.3. The same way. I mean.
So if the answer is yes, then we don't need to do anything else. So I think we can just go to the second to last slide, I think, and just thank Marco for his review, and then ask you please to review it as well, to try to polish anything else that may be missing, and try to have a document ready as soon as possible. So apologies again for the technical issues and the voice, and that will be it from my part. Thank you very much.
Do we have anybody in the document who could, in the room who could review the document as opposed to being in the document? Alan, that'd be great. Anybody else? Not, we'll try to find some folks, but that would be appreciated for some reviews.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, short update on EAP FIDO. It will change its name sometime when we had the time to actually talk to all the people involved there. But it will come. I won't say the name yet, but it will come. Yeah, so quick recap. What are we trying to do with EAP FIDO or whatever it may be called in the end? We want to have an EAP method that leverages FIDO keys to authenticate the user. The authentication of the server is done with TLS. So we have a TLS-based protocol with a phase 1 and phase 2. But instead of having the tunnel protocol and then separate the inner authentication, that one is bundled in one. And the configuration, we hope to achieve a one string to rule them all. So you ideally just enter the domain of your institution, and if you have a discoverable credential registered on your platform authenticator, then it just works. Next one. That one is just a general overview how the EAP method would work. And if you can go to the next slide already. So what happened since the last IETF was unfortunately not that much, at least not in the draft itself. I haven't published a new draft version because I was working in the background on a new proof of concept implementation. And we had some discussions on FIDO challenges on the mailing list. So first, hot off the press, running code. We have a new proof of concept version as of 5 hours ago. I was actually able to authenticate using the eduroam here. So the server is at home, and I was able to authenticate, and the new proof of concept also has the possibility to re-authenticate if I use a credential that has a user presence required flag set on the server side. So it first tries with silent authentication, and then if that is not enough, then I can re-authenticate the same credential with specific requirements. And that worked with eduroam, so yay. Next slide. One big discussion that we had on the mailing list that I don't really know the best way to deal with it is the decision on how to deal with the FIDO challenges. FIDO requires client data and then signs this client data or a hash of this client data and then sends the signature back to the server. And the server will then check this signature. And the question is, how is this client data structured? In my current draft version, I have invented a new custom challenge format. It's a binary format opposed to the JSON-like format that is used in WebAuthn. And the challenge is exported from the TLS keying material, which binds the FIDO signature to the TLS channel. And the server has the possibility to add some challenge data to the challenge, but it will always include the exported TLS, the material exported from TLS. The problem that we have with this design is that external FIDO servers, at least in the form that they are specified or about to be specified right now, would not be possible because those FIDO servers expect to supply the challenge themselves and don't have any method to supply another challenge or to have a different challenge format, at least as I read the document. And these FIDO servers also expect the FIDO challenge to be in a format like WebAuthn. So having a custom format for this FIDO challenge might be a problem if external FIDO servers should be used. So there are some advantages and some disadvantages to changing the challenge format to WebAuthn-like structures. If we actually do this, then we would lose the cryptographic binding to the TLS channel. In WebAuthn, at least as I read the spec, I haven't. If I'm wrong, then please tell me. The challenge is always generated by the FIDO server, respective the web server, completely independent of the TLS keying material for the HTTPS connection. That might not be a big problem, but we could open up our protocol to cross-protocol attacks. The idea why I wanted to bind the TLS channel to the FIDO authentication is if we actually have a use case, an attack where you have a middle person attack, then that would fall apart if you use the TLS channel binding. If we mandate the TLS certificate checks in a way that we are confident that the TLS tunnel is secure, then maybe it's not that bad if the server provides the challenge independent of the TLS keying material. I'm not sure. Aligning the challenge to the WebAuthn format would allow to use FIDO servers without any significant changes. If we want to allow silent authentication, probably we still would have to change the FIDO server implementation at some points. If they are fixed on WebAuthn, which at least as I know currently mandates at least user presence checks. So I think that's my updates. I will continue to work on the draft because it's also my master's thesis. So there will be some updates, but I'm open for any input on the questions.
Yes, this is Alan. In terms of binary versus JSON, I think it only matters if the JSON is going to be like a couple of K, because then that adds more round trips. If it's 500 bytes, why invent a new format? And then for the rest, yeah, I reading the various crypto binding stuff. Not that I claim to be a crypto person, but it's all preventing the client from generating the challenge. So if the server generates the challenge, then it doesn't matter. And then for the cross protocol attacks, I really do believe, yes, if we do check the EAP server certificate and you're sure that those FIDO credentials are for the same domain, then you don't really care that they get forwarded to a web server, because that's now a policy issue in the local site. I'm not connecting to domain 1 via EAP and then domain 2 via web. But maybe Joe disagrees with me.
I think to the JSON structures, I think the JSON never goes across the wire. It's just something that's then hashed and put into the auth data.
So this is Joe speaking as a participant. With respect to the crypto binding or whatever, I think it is a concern for if there's a man in the middle, right? You wouldn't be able to detect it. I think the man in the middle can reflect a nonce or whatever. So there is a concern there. And traditionally we've been worried about that with tunneled methods and what happens if somebody doesn't verify a certificate. Does the WebAuthn, does it derive any key material or anything, or is it just an authentication exchange?
Sorry.
Does some EAP methods would derive key material based on the authentication? You would get a value, a session key derived from the exchange. Does WebAuthn do that, or does it?
No, WebAuthn is completely web. It's just authentication that doesn't affect the HTTPS channel. I thought of including some of the FIDO material into the exported keying material for the MSK and EMSK that is currently only exported from the TLS keying material. But I'm not sure if that would even solve any problems. Would have to think about it.
Yeah, I think this is something we'll have to continue to think about and determine what to do. I don't know that it's a problem.
Yeah, I think the outer TLS, you can define MSK for that, as you said. In terms of man-in-the-middle attacks, I just want to understand who can do that and when. I mean, if you're authenticating the server certificate, that gives you some protection. And the question is, what else you need to do? I think if we're trying to reuse the web authentication, FIDO, where the server generates the challenge, you're sort of stuck there. There's not a lot more you can do on the EAP side to make sure there's no man in the middle, because the man in the middle could just change the challenge, whatever, right? Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to being able to authenticate the server and establish the integrity of that channel. I think we'd have to go back and look just to make sure that it's been a while since I've looked at, back in the day when we had all of the tunneled methods, right? What, we'd have to go back and look and see what the main issues were there. But I think if you have good server authentication, that should solve a lot of the problems. Well, I haven't looked at the draft. How's this certificate validation done? Do they have to have the root installed on their device, or?
The current idea is that because we're effectively using the same scope as WebAuthn, that we just reuse the trusted root certificates that are already on the device for web authentication, or for validating web server certificates, that we reuse that same trust anchors for EAP. So
do you do a name validation? Or?
The name validation would be equivalent to the WebAuthn name validation, or the current draft version actually explicitly requires a certain domain name. So I think with EAP FIDO, it was EAP minus FIDO minus authentication dot, and then the relying party ID. But we could change that to allow anything that would be allowed in WebAuthn.
So you're not doing DNS validation, but you verify that the certificate you get is from a particular domain, and then you use the FIDO credentials for that domain.
Right. I think I'm a little bit concerned that, what certificate would you accept to be a valid server? Right. So if you're not doing, like, if you don't do the standard host name validation, because like you're not connecting to a particular server, right, then there's a possibility that, like, well, multiple servers could have, if you're just validating the domain name, let's say, like, I'm not saying you're doing that, but you could see a problem there, and that any server that has, the specific part of your domain name could spoof that server. If you're requiring a particular name, that could be fine. It's just you'll have to be very specific about that.
And I think part of the argument there is, I would say that's really a policies thing inside your domain, whether you have a.example.com or b.example.com or c.example.com spoofing each other. That's a problem for example.com. And if you have credentials for example.com, well, you hand them to any server in example.com, and if it's not the right one, then your administrator fixes it.
That's actually the way WebAuthn works right now. So if you have a credential registered for example.com, then A, B, and C.example.com can request a signature.
I mean, if you really went completely crazy, and this is just off the top of my head, you do a TLS in EAP to get you to the Radius server, and then you just run another TLS session inside of that, and the Radius server just forwards that to whatever web server you want, and then you run FIDO inside of that.
Yeah, I think we'll have to take a closer look at how the validation is done. But I mean, because that could be a reason why we want more channel binding, right? If the server authentication has a weakness, that's what we'd want to look at. So
yeah, for me, I'm happy to remove the channel binding to the TLS channel, but we should really understand what that means and if this is actually what we want and if we don't have any other security issues arising from that. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So we're on PPT, right?
Yep.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Paresh Sawant, Apple. So me and my teammate Bart Brinkman, who is on site there, hi Bart, will be presenting EPPT, Privacy Preserving Network Access. Can you please go to the next slide? So let's do a quick recap of EPPT. What is EPPT? EAP using Privacy Pass Token. This is a privacy preserving EAP method that offers peer-only authentication without revealing any privacy sensitive information of the user or client device. And it takes place inside the secure tunnel provided by the phase one. This is very much similar to HTTP authentication scheme defined in RFC 9577 of the Privacy Pass Working Group, where HTTP authentication happens over TLS and HTTP authentication uses private token as a authentication scheme. Now, what is Privacy Pass Token? It's a product of Privacy Pass Working Group. Essentially, this is defined in the Privacy Pass architecture RFC 9576, which says that it's a cryptographically generated token, which is capable of doing or used as a credential for client authentication without compromising client's privacy or revealing any personal information of the client. Now, what are the objectives of EPPT? Now, since EPPT promises anonymity during the client authentication, its main objective is anonymous network access. It means that it is promising privacy protection against active and passive attackers, network service providers, identity providers, venue owners, enterprises, and educational institutions. Next slide, please. Here is the high-level protocol messaging between the EPPT peer and EPPT server that uses EPPT for peer authentication. The padlock indicates it's a secure tunnel established by phase one, and inside that secure tunnel, EPPT authentication is taking place. It's a very simple, lightweight protocol where the challenge is being thrown by the EPPT server, and the EPPT peer is responding to that challenge with the privacy pass token. Optionally, the identity exchange can take place before the challenge response is exchanged. And the identity exchange can be used to route the authentication to the appropriate EPPT server. Now, you'll notice here that the response to the identity request is carrying at example.com, which means it is completely privacy friendly, anonymous. There is no username or permanent identity added in it. So the rel portion of the identity is only used for the routing purpose. And the privacy pass token, once received by the EPPT server, it is validated using giving cryptographical specifications. And if found valid, then the EAP success is sent back to the EPPT peer, which concludes the EPPT authentication as successful. Next slide, please. Now, the last draft that we presented in IETF 120, we got very good feedback and many comments from many of you. And I would like to actually go over some of the important comments and feedback we received. The first one was the email inability to generate the key material. A PPT is not a mutual authentication method. It's just a peer authentication method. And it was not able to generate the key material. And that could be bad for the security. And that's the feedback what we received. It would not be able to offer a cryptographic binding. It would not have any protection against the possible MITM. So that was the one feedback we received. And also in the draft, the previous draft, we had some areas where we were leaving some room for the privacy implications. The outer EAP identity was one of them. The comment was, if we are doing so much work for the privacy protection, why leave any room, with the outer EAP identity to tell the server that who's the user is if the identity response carried any username or permanent identity. Similarly, for the TLS session resumption, it's good to have TLS session resumptions for performance and fast reconnect, but then it's also telling the server when the user is revisiting the network, and that is not good for the privacy. Client authentication during the TLS handshake. We allowed mutual authentication in the phase 1 in our previous draft, but we realized that that could not be good for the privacy because if the mutual authentication is allowed and client certificate is presented to the server, it might carry some personal information like email address on the certificate. So we should not do that. Absence of channel binding. I think it's good to have support for channel binding in order to solve line NAS or line provider problem in any EAP method. So that was a one feedback we received, and we considered that. And also there was a comment and feedback on a lack of details on deployment considerations. So our previous draft did not talk much about the various deployment scenarios and use cases and how ePPT could be configured or deployed in those use cases. So we have taken that into account. Next slide, please. So now I would like to take a pause here just to thank Alan DeCock for his valuable feedback and comments. Because of his feedback, we were able to add some significant improvements in the new draft. So thank you, Alan. So key material generation. So TLS exporter interface has been introduced, which conforms to RFC 7505. So essentially what we're trying to do here is we're trying to mitigate the possible MITM, offering a key material and key crypto binding. So here the ePPD server and the phase 1 server are kind of proving that they have access to each other's key material. The ePPD server is proving that it also has access to the security parameters of the phase 1, the TLS session, and it's also actually using the privacy pass token as a context to create the new key material. So please take a look at this particular section and let us know your feedback on the key generation part. And the ePPT also now offers a new messages for requesting channel binding if required. This is an optional thing, but the server can request a channel binding information, and the client would respond to that with the configured channel binding information. So essentially, whatever authenticator is telling to the client and whatever authenticator is telling to the each server can verify that. Also, it can verify against what it has got configured in its own local database. And then the specifications to protect privacy in case of use of outer identity. If the outer identity is revealing information via username or permanent identity, that's going to dilute or weaken the user's privacy. So we don't want that. So outer identity must be privacy friendly. It must not give the username or permanent identity in the identity response. TLS session resumptions, we are specifying in the new draft that it should be limited to the current association. So if you join a Wi-Fi network, and as long as for that Wi-Fi association, you're doing re-authentication, the session resumptions are fine. But any new association should not do session resumption. It should do a full handshake. That's what we are specifying in the new draft. and the client authentication during the TLS handshake is not allowed. If certificate request is received by the client must send the certificate TLS record with the empty array. It should not send any certificates and not actually reveal its own personal information. And we have added a new section on deployment consideration, which mainly focuses on the public and private deployments and federated deployments like open roaming and EDU roam. So this will actually talk in detail about how we are proposing various configurations and behaviors of the peer in various different deployment scenarios. Yeah, I think that's the next slide, please. Yeah, so please take a look at the latest draft and let us know if you have any questions, comments, feedback. We'll be happy to take a look at that. Thank you.
Any questions in the room or online? Hey, Mark?
Yeah, Mark Grayson here from Cisco, but speaking as chair of Open Roaming. So EPPT has been presented to Open Roaming and generated a significant amount of interest in the new use cases it supports. It actually triggered us an outreach to Wi-Fi Alliance to check whether EPPT would be compatible with Passpoint, and so Wi-Fi Alliance has confirmed that Passpoint isn't just limited to their 5 methods that they list in Table 4, so that's great news. And we're currently tweaking, I would say, Open Roaming to enable us to support EPPT. I think for the section on federation, so some of the work that I guess would be useful here would be talk about those extensions that we would like to see. For example, things around validity and best practice on validity. So what do we recommend the validity and expiration around tokens? Because we know that obviously once they're issued, they exist and they can't be replayed, but they can be stored. So some of those aspects I think would be useful from a federation perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I think Scott is excited to talk about extension here.
I actually didn't come up to talk about extensions, but hi, I'm Scott. For people that don't know, I work on Privacy Pass and have a draft on specifically extensions. One question I had here was if you've, or this is a question for like everybody that works on these types of networks in this room, is abuse a concern here? Because in Privacy Pass, we generally don't have a good way to handle revoking access, across multiple tokens. So for example, if a user is behaving badly and you want to kick them off the network, you can do that, but they're going to authenticate and come right back. So do we need this type of persistent abuse prevention in a deployment like this? Because I do believe that there are proposals floating around, maybe not in the IETF yet, but we should certainly create drafts for them for this type of functionality. But to me, it just seems like something that's very intuitive to have for this particular functionality, and it's a little bit different than the other Privacy Pass deployments that we've used in the past.
Yeah, I agree with that, Scott. I think we need a mechanism to revoke the key pair and let the server and the client know that this public key has been revoked, should not be used. So any tokens binding to this key pair should be completely purged and not used at all, not spent at all. So we need actually some that kind of mechanism out there just to actually mitigate these kind of scenarios. I agree.
Bart Brinkman, Cisco co-author. I wanted to respond to Mark. We do foresee like the use of expiration in extensions, and we can definitely provide more details in deployment considerations there.
Yes, this is Alan. In terms of abuse, if you can think of a way to abuse the system, people are doing it today. I've seen stats sort of secondhand. The EduRoam people can talk a bit more, but something like 30% of authentications in EduRoam are for expired credentials. There have been proposals to solve this generically, but if you can add something here to solve it for your EAP method, that would be very, very positive.
Yeah, sure.
And just really a follow up on Scott's point, and I guess back to federations. So yeah, absolutely. We need to be able to identify, users which are not adhering to their terms and conditions, and obviously that repeating user who then detaches and immediately attaches. I think we need a mechanism, best practice in terms of how do we identify those, so we can identify those repeated offenders. So thank you.
So I'll now come back with my privacy pass hat on. We shouldn't think about it as identification. We should think about it as, the ability to persistently block those users, because I think that type of functionality is possible in a private way. If we're thinking about reversing, in kind of undoing the privacy that the user had in order to reveal their original identity, that would certainly go against kind of the core intended use of the privacy pass protocol.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly think about improving that, but if you think about the existing mechanisms on public networks, that this is basically done based on MAC address, right? So that is still there, but we can think about this a little more as well.
Who's next?
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah, calling station ID. I mean, it may be as simple as that is then persistent. So it's not rotating every single auth, but we're able to correlate that. So I don't think we're looking to undo all of the great privacy pass work, but we just need a mechanism to be able to identify those abusers. Thank you.
Who's next?
Alan.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so if this EAP method has a way to revoke those specific EAP credentials, that's at least one thing that you're slightly more confident the vendors will implement on the client side and stop it. Separately, there is no real way other than, calling station ID, radius, whatever, to block bad behavior. There's nothing in radius to do this. There's practices. I know some of the EduRoam people were also running into issues where bad supplicants were sending 1,000 requests a second, and then the proxy chains were melting down. And the official radius response for how to deal with this is to close your eyes and stick your fingers in your ears and run away and go. You're all in it, figure it out yourself. It's all up to you. So we are trying to fix that, but it's taking time.
Hello, Alex Kluter. Chargeable user IDs being kind of tried to be grafted as something over time that you can block, which should be able to retain privacy, but in this case, maybe not.
Scott.
I just want to say on the revocable credentials, let's work collaboratively on this. There have been thoughts on this in the privacy pass in the past. I don't want to push this entirely onto this working group. Like, there should be something we can do here.
Yeah. Excuse me. So I'm hearing, some interest in the working group and in the room on this right now. It would be good for us to continue this discussion on the list, so as much as we can, so that we can continue to kind of refine this. It's a little bit of a complex use case. Right now, so are you seeking working group adoption for this draft? Yeah.
Yes.
So right now, that's not in our charter, so we'll have to do a update to the charter, and we'll just have to make sure that we make sure we're explicit about the problem we're trying to solve. I mean, we've had to do this for other things. I don't think it's currently in our charter. So it's not a huge process to do that, but we do want to get that started. Elliot?
Yeah, I just want to check on that.
Yeah.
Are out-of-band communications in the charter or not? Or out-of-band authentications in the charter? Because is this sort of would this be classed an out-of-band authentication is what I'm asking.
It might be. That's a good question.
Right, because if it's covered by an out-of-band authentication, then you're already in, it's already in your charter. So that would be the one thing, and I would ask that if we can see clarification on that, and get an answer from like the AD and from maybe if Bart, you and other and your colleague Paresh from Apple, if you guys can work with the chairs on that. Otherwise, a short charter refinement should be addressed. The question is, what order do you want to execute? Do you want to do the working group? Do you want to seek interest to figure out whether there's no point in adopting to making a charter change if
Right.
you can't, if people aren't, if we're not going to adopt the work, right?
Yeah, I think
So we do that in one step, or
probably. I think that the chairs will need to noodle on that and probably talk with the AD about, whether there needs to be an update to the charter or not. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the intention for out of band was not this particular use case, and whether we want to keep that as like a whole open for this use case, or if we want something explicit for, a privacy preserving what this is really for. It might be better to do that, just to make sure we really define what it is we're trying to do. The other thing we'll absolutely want to do, and thanks Scott for bringing it up, is we need to make sure that we have this coordinated with Privacy Pass, because there's a lot of, the whole thing about revocable credentials is going to be very well, maybe not very complex, but it's going to be complex and maybe not behave exactly how we think it should, or people have different opinions on that and what can and can't be done. So it'll be interesting discussion. So I think there will consult with.
I thank
Yep.
you. I'm sorry. I think I got your point. I just going to say, I do think there's a good conversation there about the revocable credentials, and that may require additional signaling on the back ends.
Yeah, and we'll have to. Yeah. So there's a whole sort of thing that needs to be built up around this. So I think we need to probably take this off to the list, and the chairs. And I don't know, Paul, if you have any opinion at this particular point in time, but yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll get that answer, but certainly if the proponents can just communicate with the chairs, and then we'll take things to the list. Let's see, we're almost out. Aritra, did you want to give a plug for your?
Hi. Actually, we wrote a couple of drafts and we presented in the Vancouver meeting and as well as the I think the Brisbane one as well. It's actually on the ePacker prime forward secrecy for post-quantum enhancements. I mean, we'll push something in the mailing list and ask for a review. It would be really great if we can get some review to see whether there's an interest, in moving towards a post-quantum security, because, well, ePacker forward secrecy is subjected to quantum threats. So it would be really good if we could have some interest in the review of the draft at least. But I'll send something in the mailing list and we can get the conversation started. That sounds fair.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any other business they want to cover? If not, we're done. Dinner time. I think actually, I think the ball's probably in our court. I think we want to continue to talk on the list, and we probably will need to figure out what the coordination with Privacy